I've been looking recently and reading up on the releases of camcorders from Sony and from Canon over the last week or so, and it's nice to see that camcorders are still being released. There are still cameras of that form factor being released and being marketed. The prices may be a little high, but they're still out there for people to buy. However, camcorder as a whole, the word camcorder, to me, it sounds a little bit dated. I sort of think that, you know, video camera's okay and camera's okay, but camcorder just sounds a bit sort of 80s, 90s. And be honest, you don't really see that many people out there with a camcorder anymore, do you? I mean, you'll have two groups of people. You'll have your people doing professional shoots, and you'll have people shooting on their smartphone. That's pretty much it. But I was sort of thinking, what are the benefits of a camcorder? Why would you want to carry on? Why might you want to carry on using a camcorder? And I was thinking, what are the benefits of a smartphone? So I'm going to outline 5 pluses for a camcorder today and 5 pluses for a smartphone. All the buttons on a camcorder, if it's a reasonably good one, are in the right place. They're all available there for you to reach. You don't need to fumble about on a screen, and you don't need to unlock anything. You don't need to be wearing the right stuff. They're physical buttons in many cases. And yes, a lot more have moved to capacitive touch screens now to access controls. But on most higher end camcorders, there are still a large amount of buttons that are physical. You can physically press them. And that level of control just isn't available on a smartphone. Everything has to be done some way, whether it's intuitive or not, through software. And that's not ideal when you're shooting. Secondly, reliability. If you're like me and you would like to have some degree of manual control on your cameras, you're probably going to have to use a third-party app for it. I'm not really questioning the reliability of smartphone camera, sort of the native camera and video apps on smartphones. I'm talking more about third-party apps. So for example, you may have heard of Filmic Pro. That's a video app that allows you to get a greater degree of manual control from an iPhone. Now, reliability of a camcorder such as this one that I'm shooting on today is perfect. There's never a time when it just stops recording randomly. There's never a time when the screen just drops off and just disappears unless the battery runs out. The reliability of this dedicated device for video recording is excellent. The reliability of smartphones is crap. Apps crash all the time. And yes, you might say, well, they don't crash all the time, do they? I've managed to record a video without the app crashing. Well, the fact that it crashes sometimes, and don't say you've never had an app not crash on you, because I'm sure you have. And I think the fact that they just crash sometimes is not good enough. Well, if you're videoing something seriously and it crashes, well, you've lost it, haven't you? You've lost the event that you were going to video. And you either have to redo it, which is usually at cost and frustration for other people, or if it's a unique event, you have lost the story entirely.
Peter, you've lost the news! What are you going to say?
Sorry.
Smartphones are just not reliable enough. Camcorders, dedicated hardware, dedicated software, excellent reliability. The quality itself, the quality of the output, is still better on a camcorder. People will throw specs back at me and say, the iPhone now does 4K 60p. There are loads of cameras being sold. The X90 that's been released, the the FDR AX700 that's been released, they're not even 60p at 4K. Yeah, but that doesn't really matter that much. If you're going to be using a camera for providing output to clients and making money out of stuff, you're not necessarily going to need 60 frames a second at 4K. So the fact that a smartphone will do those higher specs does not mean that it does it better. We're back to the same old megapixel argument, which I wrote in an article recently on my website. We're back to the same old megapixel argument of the 90s. This camera does 2 megapixels versus this one that only does 0.5 megapixels. It must be better. While a smartphone, the optics lack and the sensor is nowhere near as good as a dedicated sensor on a camcorder, in most cases. And in most cases also, the optics are much, much better on a camcorder. So the final output is also better. Generally too, the codecs used on camcorders are better. This camera here at the moment is recording at 50 megabits per second. I'm not sure what iPhones record at, but I don't think it's 50 megabits per second. And maybe they are now actually, but you know, generally the codecs used on camcorders are either proprietary codecs from the manufacturer, they could be intra-frame codecs, or they could just be high bit rate H.264 standard, you know, MP4 wrapper codecs. So they're usually better quality than smartphones. Your final output will be better. Zoom. What about zoom? On a camcorder, you've got zoom to play with. On this one, I've got 20 times optical, and then I've got some clear zoom, which if I'm, you know, because it's a 4K sensor, I can zoom in, and if I'm recording in HD, I get a massive amount of extra zoom. You don't get that on a smartphone. They're starting to integrate sort of methods now, which gives you actual optical zoom, but it's all having to be added into this tiny case that does so much else. It's a wonderful piece of computing technology on the smartphone, but it's not as good as this dedicated camcorder that already has zoom built into it. You've got bigger space for optics, and you've got bigger space to allow those optics to zoom. Finally, stabilization. Now, stabilization on smartphones gets better all the time, but I haven't seen one yet that matches the image stabilization available on this Sony, for example, the Boss stabilization. Not needed now because I've got it mounted and I'm just talking straight at it. Camera's not moving, but I'm yet to see a smartphone that's as good at stabilization as this Boss system. Okay, so what about smartphones? Workflow, no doubt about it. Apps for camcorders and software created by camcorder companies is awful. It's absolutely terrible. It still is bad. I cannot believe they can't get their game together and create a good piece of software. If you install an app from Sony that ties in with a camcorder, it'll do some stuff, but it is no way anywhere near as good as some dedicated software that you see out there. The workflow on a smartphone, from going from recording your video, having it on the device, going into an app that's going to deliver it, is perfect. It's completely smooth. You know, the device is connected. You know, you've got no delays there. You've got no transferring of data from one thing to another, no cables to forget, no hard drives to forget, no other computer required. It's all there. The workflow side of it is completely streamlined and is much, much more efficient and faster than you'll ever get when recording on a camcorder. Secondly, the device is always with you. It's something that you keep in your pocket all the time. It's something that you have with you all the time. And the best footage always on a camera is the stuff that you record. That sounds a bit silly. That's not quite how I wanted to phrase it actually. But what I mean is that if you haven't got your camera with you, you're not going to get that good bit of footage, that exclusive bit of footage that's captured an event that only happened once, with you know, an emergency, or maybe some footage that that law enforcement might be able to use, or a special sunrise, or I don't know, whatever it is. The camera that you've got with you is going to be the better one, and you don't always have a camcorder with you. You probably always have a smartphone with you. Software updates. They are frequent and always available on smartphones. The operating systems are permanently updated. They're able to do so much in software to improve things. The apps are regularly updated. There is so much competition in the app world that there are new ones being developed all the time, which means that you've always got something new to try, and people are always trying to, there's a real push to get that exclusive element to an app. as a consumer, it's perfect because you get the best of both worlds. You know, you get your operating system updated all the time and you get your apps updated all the time. You also get low prices on those apps. It's perfect in that respect. Power and battery. Phones are simple to charge. Everybody has power banks, everybody has USB cables, everybody has wireless charging. Not everyone has wireless charging, but wireless charging is becoming more and more frequent too. And they're just easy things to charge. You can ask the person sat next to you in the office, you can ask someone walking down the street, have you got a spare cable I can plug my phone in for 5 minutes? Someone sat in a cafe. Chances are you'll be able to get your phone charged. Not so easy with a camcorder. More of them now include USB charging. It's a bit inefficient though, because usually the voltage of the battery is different from USB, so there has to be some conversion there, which makes it very inefficient to use. Usually takes quite a long time. You can get your smartphone charged in a couple of hours. Camcorder, much longer than that. And finally, smartphones are discreet. And that's really important sometimes when you're recording video. Not that I'm saying you want to be trying to do anything sneaky when you're recording video, but sometimes you can just feel awkward doing the recording, and people feel awkward when they're being recorded. People holding up smartphones is just completely normal now. We see it everywhere, all the time. People are out there holding up their smartphone, taking pictures, taking videos. No one bats an eyelid when you see someone with a smartphone. Hold up a camcorder, yeah, people probably get a bit more uncomfortable. Go to a sort of small pro or a larger pro camcorder and people notice. They still see it and they still feel uncomfortable with it. And that makes a big difference. That the discretion and the discreet nature of a smartphone is a major advantage. You can get certain shots and you can get certain footage, certain natural footage that you still can't get with a camcorder. The camcorder would usually be used under very much more planned shoots. But the stuff, the natural stuff, the kind of family stuff, the kids and whatever, much easier to do on a smartphone than it is with a camcorder. There we go. There's 5 points for the smartphone and 5 points for the camcorder. What do you think? I think most people who record on YouTube now will use a camera of some description. They won't use a smartphone in most cases, as I said. So what do you use to record? Are you completely happy with the stuff your smartphone gives you? Do you think the specs are just good enough on smartphones? And can you think of any other benefits to either? Thanks very much for watching, and I will catch you soon. Bye.